I refused to give up my front row spot at a concert to someone claiming to be disabled, and now I'm being accused of lacking basic empathy. Hello and welcome to Story Nest. Don't forget to subscribe. It helps a ton and keeps you in the loop with all our latest stories. A few weeks ago, I found myself in another country, standing in line for a concert that had been a dream of mine for years. I've been a devoted fan of this artist for 6 long years, and this event felt like it could only happen once in a lifetime. I had spent months preparing for it, both mentally and financially, making sacrifices to ensure I could experience this moment in all its glory. It wasn't just a concert to me, it was a milestone in my life. This was going to be my only chance to see this artist live, so I went all out. I didn't just settle for any tickets, I bought general admission tickets, knowing the crowd would be massive. I wanted to be as close to the stage as possible, to be in the heart of it all. The venue doors wouldn't open until much later in the evening, but I arrived at 5 a.m., standing in the freezing cold, ready to wait whatever it took. The wait was grueling. I was hungry, shivering, and dehydrated, but it didn't matter. I had come so far, and this was something I knew I couldn't miss. As the day dragged on, the line slowly grew longer. The anticipation built up, and I could almost feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Finally, the doors opened, and the rush of people surged forward. But I wasn't worried. I had a plan. I had arrived early, endured the cold, and now I was about to secure my place at the barricade. I squeezed through the crowd, heart racing, and found a perfect spot right at the front. The stage was just within reach. I had done it. I was in the front row. This was everything I had hoped for. But as I stood there, breathing a sigh of relief, a voice behind me broke through the excitement. The tap on my shoulder was gentle, but it sent a jolt of surprise through me. I turned around to see a man standing behind me, towering over my small frame. He was easily a foot taller than me, maybe more. His expression was calm, but there was a certain sense of urgency in his voice. He introduced himself, and then, without much preamble, he told me that he was disabled and had been waiting for the venue's designated early entry for disabled attendees. Apparently, there had been some miscommunication, and he hadn't been allowed to enter early. His request was simple, or so it seemed. He asked me to give him my spot at the barricade. I was taken aback. This spot had been my dream for years. I had waited for hours, enduring the cold, hunger, and fatigue, all for a chance to stand at the front and experience this moment up close. I had worked so hard to secure this position, and now someone was asking me to give it up. I tried to remain calm and considered his words. The venue was known for being incredibly accommodating to disabled attendees. I had friends with disabilities who had been to this venue, and they were always taken care of. They were allowed early access and even had spots reserved at the front. I knew there was a system in place to ensure that people who needed extra help could enjoy the show safely, and yet, here was a man asking me to move. It wasn't that I didn't understand his position. Being disabled can certainly create difficulties in crowded, high-energy environments like concerts. But as I looked up at him, I couldn't ignore the obvious difference in our sizes. I'm only 155 centimeters, 5 feet 1 inch, and he was well over 6 feet tall. If I gave up my spot, I would lose my entire view of the show. I wouldn't be able to see anything at all. His height would block my entire line of sight. I thought about offering to move to a side section where he could stand, but I knew that wouldn't be the same for him either. I offered a compromise. I pointed out that there was an open space at the right side of the barricade. It wasn't the front row, but it was still close enough to the stage, and with his height, he'd have a fantastic view. Plus, he could hold onto the rail for support, which seemed like a good compromise for someone who was disabled. I thought I was being fair, trying to respect his needs while also preserving my experience. After all, I had waited in line for hours, endured the cold, and finally secured the spot. It wasn't unreasonable to want to keep it. But he wasn't interested in that solution. He shook his head almost immediately, dismissing my suggestion. "It's not the same," he said, his voice a little more insistent now. "The view isn't as good over there." I need to be at the front. I'm disabled, and I've had a hard time just getting here. You don't understand. I understood more than he might have realized. I wasn't just standing there with no empathy. I had friends who had faced similar challenges. I knew what it was like to feel like your needs weren't being considered, to face obstacles in environments that weren't designed for everyone. But this wasn't about a minor inconvenience. I was being asked to give up my hard-earned spot for someone who didn't seem to be using the resources available to him. I tried again, but this time, frustration crept into my voice. If it's that serious, I said, then there's an accessible section designed specifically for people with disabilities. You should have been able to enter early with that, but if you missed that, security can escort you there now. You'll have an even better view, and you'll be more comfortable. I knew that the venue had excellent provisions for disabled attendees, better options than just standing at the barricade. There was a section where they could sit or stand with a clear view, and it was way more accommodating. But he didn't want that. I don't want to sit. I want to be right at the front. I've had a hard time getting here, and now you're just being difficult. His tone was beginning to escalate, and I could feel the tension building. He wasn't even acknowledging the alternatives I was offering. He wasn't interested in the accessible options that could have provided him with the same, if not better, experience. I felt my patience wearing thin. I had tried to be reasonable, I had tried to be understanding, but now it felt like I was being taken advantage of. My heart was still set on this moment. It was my one shot, my one chance to experience this concert the way I had imagined for so long. The situation was growing more tense by the second. The right side of the barricade, which I had pointed out earlier, was filling up fast. More people were arriving, and as the section became crowded, the urgency in his voice grew. Please, I need this spot. It's not just about a good view, it's about being able to see the artist clearly. You can't possibly understand what it's like for someone in my position. I'll have a hard time otherwise. Just let me have your spot. At this point, I couldn't keep my frustration in check anymore. I had already offered alternatives, I had already been as accommodating as I could, but it was clear now that he wasn't looking for a compromise. He wasn't interested in making the experience fair for both of us, he just wanted what I had worked so hard to get. And honestly, it wasn't just about the spot anymore, it was about feeling like my efforts and my experience were being disregarded. If your disability is truly that serious, I said, my voice firm, you should have used the accessible section. If you don't want to use it, then you need to bring someone who can assist you. People like you bring canes or other support aids to help navigate situations like this. I gestured toward a nearby concertgoer who was holding a cane. That's what they do. And if you spoke to security, they would have escorted you to the accessible front row, where you can still see everything. That's why it's there, to accommodate people in your situation. His reaction was swift, and it caught me off guard. You're such an asshole, he spat at me, his words sharp and venomous. You think you can just decide I don't need this? You're a selfish piece of shit. Get fucked. I was stunned. He stormed off, muttering under his breath, and I stood there, still gripping the barricade, feeling the rush of adrenaline fade into confusion. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt. Was I too harsh? Was I wrong to stand my ground when he had seemed so desperate? But another part of me felt that I had done everything I could. I had tried to offer solutions, tried to help him find a way to enjoy the concert without me losing the experience I had worked so hard for. Ultimately, I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't quite add up. The venue was well equipped to handle his needs, and yet he seemed unwilling to make use of it. I couldn't help but wonder if he had just wanted my spot all along, using his disability as leverage to get it. As the concert finally started, the crowd swelled around me, and I was still in that coveted front row. But the interaction lingered in my mind. Did I do the right thing? It was a difficult moment, but in the end, I had to prioritize my own experience. It wasn't fair for him to ask me to sacrifice what I had worked so hard for, no matter what his reasons were.